Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the newest patron, Christy. Shout out to Christy. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. Make sure to check it out. www.patreon.com/the Juan and Juan podcast. Exclusive episodes, over 40 episodes on there now. Exclusive content only found on there, and early access to all of the episodes a week ahead of time. So thank you so much, Christy, and welcome to the Juan and Juan podcast Patreon family. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of my listeners, and thank you for the support. Hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you.
I don't know if any of you are turn-of-the-century weird fiction fans, but there's this guy named H.P. Lovecraft, who's a very famous American weird fiction author. And he espoused a view which is called Cosmicism. And the essence of Cosmicism is cosmic indifference. So what he was saying is basically, yes, there are these massively intelligent entities out there, but they're not good, they're not evil. They just don't give a shit about you even in the slightest. The same way that you don't care about an ant is the same way they're not going to care about you. And these things that we're summoning into the world now,
what the fuck,
are not demons, they're not evil, but they're more like the Lovecraftian great old ones. There are entities that are not necessarily going to be aligned with what we want.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are pleased to announce the successful merger of Cthulhu and the Cune. Cthulhu's track record for complete dominance and interdimensionary rule is without question. And now, coupled with the legitimacy and instantly recognizable brand name of the Cune, we intend to bring change and fight injustice as the all-new Cune and Friends.
What do I do, Lord? Destroy the child. Corrupt them all. This is their plan, people. These are demons. Just like the Bible says, it's basically an intergalactic invasion into this space through people. I'm telling you, it's what all the ancients said, it's what they warned of, it's what we're dealing with. They're demons. They're frickin' interdimensional invaders, okay? I'll just say it, make fun of me all you want on CNN or wherever, but everyone already innately knows this. These people are not frickin' humans, okay? Hillary Clinton is a goddamn demon.
Welcome to the Juan on Juan podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
And welcome back to another episode. The first ever episode on H.P. Lovecraft. And who better to do this episode with than Mr. H.P. Shovecraft, the one and only. What's up, bro?
What's going on, man? How you been?
I've been good, man. I'm just wearing my H.P. Lovecraft shirt, and I'm wearing my robe. We might summon some great old ones today, perhaps. Maybe not.
Which Lovecraft shirt you got on?
Let's see here. Can you see that? It's got H.P.
Oh, that's fucking dope. Yeah, dude, that's sick. That's absolutely sick. I got got my little Lovecraft tombstone back here. And my pretty copy of the Mythos is back here as well. I was gonna bring out my my duct tape together copy that I lend out to people. That's the one that I read when I was but a lad, but I got this the one year from a good buddy for Christmas. It's a nice little gold bound edition that I don't read because I have the other one.
For the listeners that haven't heard you before on the show, Anton, may you please share your social medias or anything that you want to plug.
Of course. I am a horror game streamer on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/InvaderDaggett_TTV. You can check me out playing Dead by Daylight, Phasmophobia, Devour. Juan and Tom and I had a pretty good Phasmophobia game, but he hasn't been back on since. Hoping that'll change soon. Also co-host Strange Brew podcast along with Tom, Billy, and Juan over here, of course. And Instagram HP Shovecraft.
Yeah, and I'll post that in the show notes. Yeah, I haven't been on, bro. I've been deep into research into different subjects, right? Trying to find the answers to the universe, if you will.
It's 42.
It's 42?
Yeah, the ultimate answer to the universe is 42.
I thought it was 33.
No, it's 42.
Okay, I'll write that down here in a second. So, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Right, we're going to be talking about H.P. Lovecraft, Howard Phillips Lovecraft today.
It wouldn't be a Lovecraft show if you don't immediately start off with being the man was a deplorable racist.
Yes, he was xenophobic. He was a horrible racist, and his cat's name was the name that shall not be named.
Oh, you're not gonna drop it?
I'm not gonna drop it.
You're not gonna drop it?
No, I'm not gonna drop it. I'm not gonna drop it.
You'll be more powerful than Batman, Superman, and the Incredible Hulk put together if you do.
You can Google his cat's name, and you can shoot me an email and see what you think about that. Make sure to follow me on social media at the Juan on Juan Podcast, www.thejuanonjuanpodcast.com, and make sure to check out the Patreon. It's on fucking fire right now. www.patreon.com/the Juan on Juan Podcast.
First Patreon right here, baby.
Anton was the first subscriber. Yes, and I appreciate all of you. And yeah, let's get to this shit. I wanted to start off with, what is your favorite Lovecraft story?
Oh,
Anton?
man. So for me, it's a three-way tie. I think arguably Dunwich Horror is his best piece of work. I think it's the most complete as a Lovecraft story. I would say, but Shadow over Innsmouth and The Color Out of Space are right there, neck and neck with Dunwich, in my opinion. I got for all the viewers. This is the wood carving of the Innsmouth Massacre.
Oh yeah, that's dope.
I got that when I was in Salem, but yeah. So like, I don't know, just the whole. I feel like that's really where you get a lot of the good bits of the mythos. You know, you get the fish people, you get the relationship with the deep ones in Innsmouth. With Dunwich Horror, you get introduced to Shub-Niggurath and Azathoth as well. No, Azathoth's not in that. Nyarlathotep is briefly in that. And I would say Color Out of Space has just been done by so many different people in so many movies that to deny its influence is foolish.
Yes,
it's like sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was for example, the one that most people don't even realize is a rendition of The Color Out of Space is the Stephen King bit from the movie Creepshow, where the meteor lands and all the green shit starts growing everywhere. It's basically just Color Out of Space minus the color. Insert a carnivorous peat moss.
Yes. And Lovecraft, these entities were not the focal points of his work, right?
Mm-mm.
It was more of like they had a background, but they were always there. They weren't like, hey, this thing caused this thing, right? Maybe perhaps in here and there, but they were never like, oh, this is the main thing. It was always like there's a background to it, there's a mythos to it, and they just exist, right? Like in this sort of right, that's what Cosmicism is. It's always been there, no matter what. There's not a fucking thing that you can do about it, and that's that. My favorite story of his is the music of Eric Zahn.
That's a fantastic story.
It's a student is intrigued by the hauntingly beautiful music coming from the room above his. He finds that an eccentric German violinist, Eric Zahn, is responsible, but that there is a terrible secret behind his music. And I encourage the listeners to go and check it out. And every single time, bro, that I think about the way that they describe the music, otherworldly, cosmic, like nothing I had ever heard before, this is what comes to mind. Eric Zahn was fucking jamming now. He was the OG of the Star Wars Cantina song, bro. And that's bro, that's what I always think about every time I'm reading that story. I'm like,
really?
Yeah, dude, for some fucking reason. Because that's like an unforgettable, like, alien music. You know what I mean? It's like they're fucking jam. It's iconic.
Oh my god, bro, that totally changes the whole tone of the story. I'm thinking you're gonna put out some haunting like violin, just like, making the weirdest noises that no earthly string should be able to conjure these sounds, and you're just like da, 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 da. Oh, brilliant. I fucking love it.
I love it. So I encourage the people to check that out, and that's my favorite.
Oh man, dude, that would probably drive the dude insane as well.
That's what I'm saying.
What the fuck is this?
It's my fucking jam, dog. He's
so good.
He's doing TikTok videos and shit.
Eric Zahn's so tired of playing it for people that he's like, I'll play whatever, and you can listen, but don't ever listen to that song again.
What if the secrets of the universe to be able to summon these great old ones is in that song? If you play it note by note, and you're just able to unlock some sort of cosmic secret, right? The fucking, fucking hit that shit. You imagine in a rave or some shit, bro?
Next to me. Space-time just unfolds itself.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that's always reminded the first time I was like, man, what does this remind me? I was like, oh shit, that's right. So I wanted to start off with my favorite quote by H.P. Lovecraft, and that is being the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And mind you, this is a guy who wrote, some people say 75,000 letters, other people say up to 100,000 letters. He was the most prolific writer of letters for his time, and he has shaped what has become horror, the genre of horror. He has inspired a ton of people, right? We have The Thing, which is a very Lovecraftian aspect. We have all these different movies. What's that one movie with the girl from Twilight, the latest one, Underwater or some shit like that? Where
That's the one that has like a giant Cthulhu deity to it. One of the newer Twilight Zone episodes, the ones directed by Jordan Peele, there is a sentient cephalopod episode where Joel McHale from Community and the Talk Soup, and other shit like that. They're all part of this research team in Antarctica, and there's a bunch of weird shit going down, and it turns out it's an octopus that's fully aware of everything and is like displaying above human level consciousness, which of course is very Lovecraftian in and of itself. A good portion of Stephen King's shit was just ripped off of Lovecraft, like The Mist. The Mist is about as Lovecraft as it gets as far as Stephen King goes. But I mean, Lovecraft and Poe are really the two biggest wells from which Gothic literature springs, at least in modern standpoints. Then you have like Robert Bloch. You have who wrote King in Yellow.
Oh yes, I know who you're talking about. But
I
don't know his name.
I can't believe it's Robert Chambers. Robert Chambers, I believe, or was Robert Chambers one of Lovecraft's contemporaries?
The King in Yellow.
Can you pull that up? I want to say it's Robert Chambers.
Let me check here. My internet's acting up, of course. So yeah, it's by Robert W. Chambers. Yes.
Yep. Okay, so it was Robert Chambers.
Yes, and it's these stories, right, and these things that incite this sort of indifference within you. And I wanted to, today's episode is going to be packed full of a lot of information. I'm going to start off with his life first, and then I'm going to get into the whole cosmicism. We're going to talk about maybe his occultism relationship, if that was true or not, and then just little hidden nuggets here and there that we can talk about. And we know that recently I mentioned something on another podcast. Shout out to Kyle from the Big Dumb Podcast. And I posted it on Twitter or on TikTok, and they had a fucking meltdown because of what I had said. And I'll bring that up here in a little bit. So I want to start off with his early life being Howard Phillips Lovecraft. And some speculate, again, up to 75,000 letters during his lifetime. Some say 100,000 plus. Mm-hmm. And there is not much that is not known of him because he wrote so much within his life. He literally wrote about everything. Some things more than others, but nonetheless wrote extensively. He was born August 20th, 1890 at 9 a.m. in Providence, Rhode Island, right? He says, I am Providence. He says that he always comes back there. And a lot of
on his tombstone.
Yeah, it's on his tombstone.
It's the most pretentious gravestone in all of Providence, yeah.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was, born here we go. Yeah, I forgot what the fuck I was going to say. Anyways, but oh yes, a lot of the some of the places that he wrote about were based off of Providence, correct? That's one of his things.
Lovecraft wasn't very well traveled through most of his life, and you write what you know, especially as as prolific of a writer as Lovecraft was. So of course he drew most of his inspiration from the surrounding areas. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that's why most of his stuff takes place in quote unquote Lovecraft country, which is just this fictional area in Massachusetts. The exception of that being, of course, like Mountains of Madness, which takes place in Antarctica, or the ones that take place in space, because he was also an astronomy enthusiast. He was an amateur astronomer. So, of course, Lovecraft looking to the heavens and looking to the ocean, which is both things that are directly in his line of sight, are going to give him his biggest source of inspiration.
And maybe when he went to school, because he never graduated, when he figured out that he was shitty as fuck in math, he found out he couldn't, right? There was more math in astronomy than anything. So he was a very sensitive person, and we'll get to that. So his mother, Sarah Susan Lovecraft, his father, Winfield Scott Lovecraft. His father was a traveling salesman for a silversmithing company. And when Lovecraft was 3, his father suffered a nervous breakdown in a hotel room.
Yes.
He was brought back to Butler Hospital, where he remained for 5 years before dying in 1898. And Lovecraft was told that his dad was paralyzed, comatose, that he was all fucked up, but there's evidence that suggests otherwise. His father was to have said he died of a form of neurosyphilis, Okay. And after his dad died, he would be raised by his mother, his 2 aunts, and his grandfather, a successful at the time businessman, Whipple Van Buren Phillips. And suppose, I think you can trace back their lineage like way, way back, right?
Yeah, they're proper Plymouth people. They are as waspy as it gets.
Yeah, so they were like a successful family until, again, at the age of 2, he was reciting poetry, reading at the age of 3, and writing by the age of 6 or 7. So he was a bright kid, right? He was probably a genius, no?
I would say I don't know that I would call him a literary genius, because I know there's a lot of people that are very critical of his writing style. The overuse
Very
of adjectives.
Convoluted. Yeah. It's a Baroque, right? Like a different.
Yes. But he had an extraordinarily large vocabulary, so that's why it works, I think. Because a lot of people try and write like Lovecraft, being like the slimy, crawling, mysterious thing, and it's like, but they're only using words like slimy and crawling and mysterious, and it's just like, dude, you're not.
Eldritch. That's the main one.
Eldritch. Yes, all of the buzzwords in Lovecraft. Tentacled. It's like, dude.
Yeah, tentacle, like fucking tentacle porn. He read Arabian Nights
tentacle bowl
at the age of 5, where, depending which account to read, was either told about the name Abdul al-Hazred or came up with it in a dream, right? This being a fictional character behind the authoring of the mystical Necronomicon. And unfortunately, we're not going to be really covering the Necronomicon today because it is an extensive episode, and we'll do that for later on. And his earliest work, which can be traced back to 1896, was The Noble Eavesdropper. His interest in the weird was fueled by his grandfather in his library, who entertained Lovecraft with off-the-cuff weird tales in the Gothic mode. So he started off by writing these journals, I believe it was, right? Mm-hmm. The very first things he started writing these journals, and then obviously amateur journalism really helped him become what he became, because he was depressed and all this shit. And his grandfather was one who told him these ghost stories about different, all these weird tales of paranormal and all this shit. And he had a library in his house, and Lovecraft was in there reading all this shit as a kid. So again, that could be a potential influence on what became of I don't know if you want to call him the Great Lovecraft, but somebody who undoubtedly influenced literature and modern and pop culture in a way that even, I want to say that even, who was it that wrote William Shakespeare? Almost, I can put him up there, and his influence with literature. So,
with modern horror, I would say absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. A lot of the things that people don't realize, even in video games, pop culture, music, everything. A lot of things that you don't know are Lovecraftian in nature.
Well, just the phrase itself, Lovecraftian, has become just synonymous with cosmic weird. It's often used to describe anything that's cosmic weird. Mm-hmm. It's its own fucking subcategory of horror movies.
Yeah. So Lovecraft was a lonely and sickly boy. He suffered from frequent illness, and many of them apparently psychological. He never really went to school. It was very spotty, and most of his learning was done via independent reading. He did manage to go to high school for a brief bit, and he found some relief in that, but he obviously had some sort of mental breakdown, quote unquote, and never graduated. By 1906 and on, he was already writing columns for various papers. In 1904, his grandfather died, and due to various bad investments, it left the Lovecraft family in financial ruin. One of
the biggest things with that is that they owned a dam that had apparently exploded. Yeah, this was just recently in one of the letters that I'd recently been reading about Lovecraft, which was Suicide Can Wait. Because once his grandfather died, that was the first time, and by his own admission, really the only time that he seriously considered killing himself. But they were saying that the family dam had exploded and left them, in Lovecraft's words, relatively poor. But we're talking about a man who eventually, died. Lovecraft himself died of, intestinal cancer because of his fucking atrocious diet, because he was insanely frugal, because he was poor. But he didn't want to drop the airs of being a Providence name. I don't want to say socialite, because Lovecraft wasn't really a social person outside of the letters and corresponding with other people that, were in the same literary category as Lovecraft himself. But the heirs, I think the image was more important to him than anything.
So Lovecraft and his mother were forced to move out, right, due to this, from their lavish home. It was like Victorian or some shit like that. And it was into a more cramped quarters some blocks away. It was only a few blocks away, and this house is still standing, I believe. And this devastated Lovecraft so much that he even contemplated suicide, how you mentioned. He would take these long bike rides and look at the river and think about jumping in and just dying.
Yep.
In
Talked
19
about drowning
yeah,
quite a
and
lot.
drowning. Yeah, right. This has to do with Cthulhu, right? Or Cthulhu, or however the fuck you want to pronounce it.
I mean, it's supposed to be unpronounceable by human
Yeah.
tongue, so
Yeah.
you know.
So, in 1908, before graduating, he suffered a mental breakdown, which made him leave school without a diploma. From 1908 to 1913, Lovecraft was a virtual hermit. He was said to walk around with, the typical. It reminds me of the Vampire Kiss when he's like walking around like all secretive and shit with his collar folded up. He was like this. He wouldn't look people in the eye. He would only come out at night. He was a virtual fucking hermit. This guy was a weirdo. He said
100%.
wouldn't make eye contact with people, would look straight ahead and just be in his own little world. Maybe he was on the spectrum. I think Nikola Tesla was on the spectrum.
Oh, I think they were both. Well, and Lovecraft and Tesla were both notoriously asexual, which we can get into the argument, was Lovecraft gay? I don't fucking think so. I think Lovecraft was the definition of someone who is asexual.
He was a nerd.
He was an uber nerd. I would say nerd doesn't even describe it, because nerds love pussy, so...
Yeah, he was a weird, eccentric guy. He was just weird. But and during this time, he was thrown into an unhealthy relationship with his mother, as we know. She would.
I don't know that we could say it was this time that it started. I would say from the get-go he had a horribly unhealthy relationship with his mother.
She would call him ugly. She would say that he was grotesque, to the point where he believed it. She would bend down as to not dislocate his arm when walking next to him. She was very overprotective. It was a love-hate relationship. And it reminded me of the Bates Motel. Have you seen that series?
Very Norman Batesy, yeah. Which I think even honestly, who was it that wrote? It wasn't William Peter Blatty. That was The Exorcist.
That wrote Bates Motel?
Psycho. Who wrote Psycho? The original.
The movie, the one with the guy from Batman, or was it Batman? Psycho, the movie.
The original movie, not the
1960. Alfred Hitchcock.
The Hitchcock, but I can't remember who wrote the book that Psycho was inspired by. Because the book was written about Ed Gein. Hang on, who wrote Psycho?
Robert Bloch.
Robert Bloch. Okay, so it was Robert Bloch. I believe Robert Bloch was actually one of Lovecraft's contemporaries, so it's entirely possible that may have been inspired in some way, at least the mother-son relationship. But the thing that's crazy about her calling him ugly is that, I've heard it speculated that it's because he reminded her of his father. But if you look at a picture of Howard next to his mother, they are the fucking spitting image of one another. So I think it's much more from just a sense of deep self-loathing that she had, and with her own personal faults. Another thing with his mother is she also, spoiler alert, ends up in the insane asylum, the same one that claimed his father. Was that related? Did she contract syphilis, do you think, from him? Because that's highly speculative. And I think maybe just the Lovecraft name is what managed to keep that information from the public.
I think so. I think so. I think I told you that. I think that she did contract it from her. Because what are the chances, right? But she ultimately died from a gallbladder operation that she died from. She didn't die from like neurosyphilis like her dad. But it's weird that she ended up in the same asylum or hospital or whatever it was.
Well, suffering a very similar mental breakdown as well.
Yes. And so later on, Lovecraft would become inspired by amateur journalism, where he would go on to publish in various pulp magazines of the day. And the reason that they called them pulp was because they were very, very low quality, right? The cheapest that they could make them at the time. And they were pretty much pulp paper. Exactly. It was just shitty magazines.
You threw it away when you were done with it. That's why weird fiction and weird tales are so highly sought after by collectors now. Because it's just something that they were like, nah, fuck this. We're done reading it. Throw it away. Because nobody knew who Lovecraft was. He wasn't prolific until well after he had died.
Yes. This entire experience was said to have saved Lovecraft from a life of unproductive reclusiveness. He himself once said in 1914, when the kindly hand of amateurdom was first extended to me, I was close to the state of vegetation as any animal well can be. With the advent of the united, I can't read my fucking handwriting. With the advent of the united, I obtained a renewal to live, a renewed sense of existence as other than a superfluous weight, and found a sphere in which I could feel that my efforts were not wholly futile. For the first time, I could imagine that my clumsy graspings or gropings after art were a little more than faint cries lost in the unlistening world. See how he fucking writes like all this.
It is seething with self-loathing. All of it.
My handwriting and I can't read his shit.
all of it reeks of a self-loathing, depressed teenager, one who feels extraordinarily isolated from everyone, and a lot of that, is probably due to his just wildly xenophobic views, and not just of racial standpoints, but he viewed anyone who was not of good stock in a disparaging way. So it didn't matter if obviously the brunt of it went towards, immigrants and African Americans and things along those lines. But he despised poor Appalachian white folk. He despised mixed people. He despised everyone that wasn't Lovecraft, basically. So, that goes that goes hand in hand with a lot of psychopathy as well, simply because, most of those people have this egocentric view of the universe, which with Lovecraft, it was almost a yin and yang, where it was like he would go through bouts where he would be just, I have the best worldview. This is the only worldview that matters, to his cosmicism and his cosmic nihilism, which is basically just none of this fucking matters. Absolutely none of this fucking matters. So, and if none of it matters, then why are you so hung up about race?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hashtag no lives matter, right? So he kept a steady flow until 1922 with various different works and publications. And at this time, it was when he had various pen pals. And these pen pals, he would introduce ideas to them and vice versa. And the Cthulhu mythos was born from these relationships that he had with all these other authors and writers and different. He would introduce them to different ideas. He would try different ideas on them to see what they thought about it. And he would write extensively to these people. He was very generous with his time, right? He would write just fucking novels to these people, and I don't know where the fuck he would find the time for
74. Well, that's all he fucking did. Lovecraft never held a goddamn job a day in his life. He refused to. He believed it was beneath him. It was one of the reasons why he got so bent out of shape when they lost the mansion. And he used to ride past it constantly. I believe it was turned into either a doctor's office or a lawyer's office. And he would lament over that constantly. But yeah, so for a point of reference for the listeners out there, there's a podcast by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society called Voluminous, and that's only his letters. It's just them reading his letters, and not all of them either. That one that I was talking about, the suicide one, is, I believe it's like a 3 or 4 part episode. Some of Lovecraft's letters were 74 pages plus that he would write to people. We're not talking about hey, it's Howard. How's it going? I walked on the coast the other day and saw a starfish. Gave me an idea for an elder creature. Well, it's been swell. Gotta go. Your pal, Lovecraft. It was this fucking extensive, this is my opinion on this, and I think that this is superfluous, and this is blah, 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 blah. And just, 400 words that you've never fucking heard of that he wrote because he's Howard Phillips Lovecraft. He's the greatest author in his own mind.
Yes, and he became to be known as one of the greatest and most prolific letter writers of the century. Mm-hmm. And there's something that people refer to as the Lovecraft curse, because, again, his mother would suffer a mental breakdown to where she would be put in, again, the Butler Hospital. And like Lovecraft's father, his mother would never emerge again and died in 1921. However, she died from a botched gallbladder operation. Now, there's a couple things that I ran across, that I stumbled across in this research of this episode, and the one being that the idea that his mother was very superstitious in her, coming up and all this stuff, and that she would dress her in Celtic culture. It was believed that boys were more susceptible to being kidnapped by fairies. And I don't know if this has to do with Lovecraft's his dreams that he described of the gauntly things, right? The
night gaunts.
The night gaunts, where he would be taken almost in a abduction, alien gray kind of way, right? And it was said that his mother, again, contributing to his fucked up childhood, dressed him up as a girl and even gave him a girl name. And there are these pictures that it's Lovecraft's mother with a little girl. Yep. And it's said to be Lovecraft. I don't know how true that is, but
it's true. At least from what we can gather, because it was common practice during the Victorian and the Georgian ages, because it was just leftover Celtic and Welsh mythology, the mythology of the changeling, coming in and taking your child. And that was how they dealt with things like, mental retardation, physical deformities, and other things along those lines. Is the child isn't my child. It was someone came in the middle of the night and took it. It's a changeling. But Oscar Wilde's mother did the same thing. There's images of Oscar Wilde dressed up as a girl.
Yeah. Well, again, it was
gay. So
yeah, they were superstitious right back then, and I stumbled across this, and this was the thing that really set the fandom off after me on TikTok. They were like,
when you referred to Cthulhu as a djinn and that dude lost his shit,
you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I'm like,
completely missed what you were trying to say.
Listen,
like
what I meant to say was not that Cthulhu is a djinn, but maybe that the djinn was Cthulhu, right? Because listen, just hear me the fuck out, please, for 1 second. We know that Lovecraft had vivid nightmares, right? And they were his source of inspiration. He was also said to have collected Oriental pottery and little figurines. Now,
as well as Arabic, yes.
Yes. And he was obsessed with Arabian Nights, and Abdul al-Hazred was one of his personas that came to him in a dream or whatever. Now, we know that the famous jinn is the genie in the bottle, okay? What if, I propose, and this is not my idea, this is something that I stumbled across in research. What if the djinn was Cthulhu, and it was something that he had collected, and it attached himself to this person being Lovecraft, and through that he was able to convey and bring into existence on a mental level this crazy hierarchy of these great old ones and all these gods and goddesses that exist on the outside of the fabric of reality that we're not able to comprehend in any way, shape, or form. And that was all I said, and people just fucking went crazy, bro. I was like, holy shit. There was like 50 plus comments on it, and it didn't get that many views. It probably got like 5,000 views, 4,000 views, whatever, but still people were like, oh, you fucking retard. I'm like, bro, I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not, I'm just a random podcaster that says shit. You know what I mean?
You're just voicing an idea that's in your head. And that was a very fun thread to be a part of. So thank you. I remember when I got the text and you're like, I'm fighting for my life out here. I need answers. I'm like, all right, fine.
I'm like,
I understood exactly what you were talking about. I was like, no, I get that. Like maybe one of the, not icons, but one of the items that Lovecraft acquired, or a book or something, was possessed by the spirit of this djinn, who instilled, or fed into Lovecraft's already burgeoning imagination. That started to, flesh out the mythos a little bit and gave him names of things, or just changed names of things that already existed. Because while sidebar on the Lovecraft possibly being an occultist thing, which I really don't think he was. I think if he actually was, we would have a lot more of a clue to it. Because I know that I've heard people say, he was worried that he'd end up in the same sanitarium as his parents. It's like, I don't think that's enough to stop Lovecraft from expressing it. He would have written it a little more in his fiction. I mean, it's there for sure, but he doesn't go into the nitty-gritty aspects of ritual magic. He just more goes into the, these jungle people are dancing and doing drums. So most of that was from like the voodoo, lore of the day, and his own personal prejudices. But I think that you can definitely make the argument that Lovecraft is the father of a neo-paganism, almost exclusive to America, because there are groups that worship and attempt to summon old ones constantly. Yeah. They're using a fucking Necronomicon that was written by a douchebag in the 70s, but, I mean, hey.
Yeah.
Whatever floats your cracker, man.
So, and we'll get into that here in a second. During an amateur journalism convention in Boston in 1921, he would meet his first and only wife, right? Sonia Haft Green. And I tried looking into her because...
Jewish.
And she was a Russian Jew, 7 years his senior.
Bingo.
And I tried looking into some occult connections that she supposedly had, but I wasn't able to find anything. And they would eventually get a divorce in 1929. But during and after these years, he would write some of his most notable works. The Call of Cthulhu, 1926. At the Mountains of Madness, 1931. The Shadow Out of Time, 1934, 1935. And during the last 2 or 3 years of his life were filled with hardships, right? He was very poor. He was a ghostwriter for a long time, and he was just getting a little bit of money here and there. And eventually he would check into Brown Memorial Hospital in 1937, where he would die 5 days later. He died penniless without having actually published a full book or a novel. Like, he never actually published it. It was just a bunch of his things. And Lovecraft's work would go on to be published in paper, back and translated into dozens of languages through the Arkham Horror, which were his Arkham House, which August Derlin and Donald Wandry, right? I said that right. And they would go on to publish all his works, right? And thanks to them, we know once they translated into French, that was a real big thing, right? The French love the shit. And
the French just have impeccable taste for art. Yeah. They really do.
Yeah, I mean, but look at the people, right? Look at the culture and look at the you know, everything over there, right? And so we know from this a cultural movement was sparked, and his influence can be seen all throughout pop culture and more. And that will, I want to get into Lovecraft's impact. Go ahead.
Derleth is the one that coined the term Cthulhu mythos. He's accredited with basically being the person that put it all together. Before that, it was just a collection of deities in Lovecraft's work that, you know, they appear throughout multiples, but like the most prolific of them, Cthulhu himself or herself, depending on which school you subscribe to, is mentioned in like one fucking book or one story, but it's the one that everyone knows because I think Call of Cthulhu just rolls off the tongue.
Yes. And I want to get into Lovecraft's impact, right? And maybe the Cthulhu mythos now. And you can say Lovecraft created his own genre. He presents man's indifference to his celestial counterpart like no one else had before him had. Lovecraft's Great Old Ones and a sort of neo-pagan mythos presented the idea that things were much older than mankind and much older than Earth. And they're gazing upon us, right? And they've always been there at the very edge of the fabric of existence, and they will only come in when they want to be seen, right? And when they come in, you won't even know that they're fucking here. And this is from the Call of Cthulhu. These old ones were gone now, hidden in distant wastes and dark places all over the world, until the time when the great priest Cthulhu from his dark house in the mighty city of Rilhilach under the waters should rise and bring the earth again beneath his sway. And that was from the Call of Cthulhu. And the idea that these otherworldly creatures or entities that have been banished and are to return to take back what was theirs, right? This idea that there's these things that we can't comprehend even through language, right? Or even through thought, right? The only thing that they have control over is through our emotions, right? And they invoke the emotion of fear, which is, again, the oldest and strongest kind of emotion.
Fear and madness.
Fear and madness. And the great old ones are the universe or the cosmos. They are an uncontrollable force such as the Logos was for the Stoics. And I want to read a couple quotes here if you want to interrupt me, Anton, and say something.
So the great old ones and all of the deities within Lovecraft's mythos aren't even subject to the laws of tangible reality. For example, Cthulhu. Dead Cthulhu lies dreaming. They reference them as dead, but they're not. They're just simply waiting for the time when the stars are right. And humans can have a mild impact on them, is that there are, miscellaneous cults that exist to attempt to summon these beings. But once they're awakened, we are inconsequential to them. We are ants on a hill, and they will go about their business and do their, do their deeds as they see fit. Regardless for mankind. It's not as though these things can even really be classified as evil. The only one that I would say could really be classified as evil is Nyarlathotep, which is weird because they're also the only one that could really be classified as having helped out humanity in any facet. But Nyarlathotep really just seems to love the chaos and just seems to love fucking with people. And the only good they've ever done for people is whatever serves their agenda at the time.
Yeah, I think of Nyarlathotep as like an Enki or Enlil, right, of the Sumerian myths, where there's like this trickster god, right? You have Enlil that he loved the humans, and then you have Enki that wanted to end all of them, right? Or I might have that mixed up because, again, there's a lot
just
of names.
A combination of both of them. And Nyarlathotep is simply an extension of Azathoth. Azathoth, the mindless, dreaming idiot god, the one whose incessant piping at the center of the universe is what makes all of creation. So essentially, think of it like Lovecraft. Lovecraft was also a lucid dreamer, as being so prolific of a dreamer and getting his inspiration from there. Like when we go into the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the character of Randolph Carter was Lovecraft's avatar in his own works. I believe to an extent Nyarlathotep was also Lovecraft's avatar, which existed within the avatar already of Azathoth, because Lovecraft viewed himself as the dreamer of this world, because he's dreaming up his entire mythos and creating it. And then if Lovecraft wakes up from these dreams, they're gone.
Yes. And also, did you remember about the correlation between him and Houdini? Houdini also had some sort of
did ghostwriting for Houdini under the pyramids, or under
I think
was a Houdini story.
Yeah, where like the guy kidnaps him and shows him all this fucking crazy stuff.
It's basically, the story of a magician, a stage magician like Houdini, who goes to the Middle East and performs all these tricks, pisses off a whole bunch of, Middle Eastern magicians, and they're like, all right, we'll fucking see how good you are. And they tie him up and drop him in a pyramid.
Yeah, and he also had taken, right, and made up this other persona, which I don't have the name right offhand, but it also was almost like Abdul Ahazred, which is the Mad Arab. Right. He also had some persona that he adopted, supposedly that came to him in his dreams, right? So again, this idea that not that Cthulhu was a jinn, but that the jinn was Cthulhu, and he visited various people all throughout history in order to invoke these thoughts in people and create this mythos that now exists forever, right? Now this will forever be a thing. Now,
for sure.
The whole aspect of him being an occultist or not, there are a lot of occult aspects to his work, right? A lot of the practices in his work. He did write that he was not an occultist and that he didn't have the time or money for it.
Staunch atheist.
Yeah,
in his own writings, he was a staunch atheist.
But Anton, what do you think it is that he was able to recall all these things? There's an aspect of like Sufism and obviously ancient religion in all his writings. All these gods that he talks about, there can be some connections made to real life religious,
for sure.
figures.
And I think that stems from his grandfather's library. Lovecraft was fascinated with the Middle East. Lovecraft was fascinated with the Orient. Those are the places from which these myths come. The Middle East is the cradle of civilization, allegedly. I know that there's a lot of talk about things being found in South America now that are kind of just like, okay, we have no fucking idea. But, I think that the logical and practical answer to that, and the non-esoteric answer to that, is it most likely came from his grandfather's library. His grandfather seemed like the kind of man that, while a well put together, northeastern wasp, he also seemed to entertain, by telling Lovecraft these ghost stories and going more into the metaphysical and stuff. He seemed to have more of like, a supernatural or even just a cheery nature about him. Like obviously there's a reason Lovecraft looked up to this man. The lack of a present father figure, I'm sure, is a massive part of it. But I would say that I think that a lot of Lovecraft's information and inspiration comes from what he read as a child, because that was his escape. That's where he lived. He lived in books. He lived in literature. There's a reason the man's vocabulary was as profound as it was.
Yes, and I want to get into the Cthulhu mythos and talk about that a little bit, and about the cosmicism aspect and the horror aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to start off with a couple of quotes here. The first being by Nikola Tesla. And I believe it's got to do with a lot what we're talking about. He says here, "My brain is only a receiver in the universe. There is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of the core, but I know that it exists." That's Nikola Tesla. We have Albert Einstein. "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know now and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all that ever will be to know and understand." And we have here Friedrich Nietzsche, which I'm doing an episode on him soon.
Nice.
"Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." Right?
I think for the Nietzsche quote, I think that it's more a criticism on the nature of mankind versus it being some sort of cosmic actual thing. Whereas, the whole don't become, to use a horrible thing, don't become so anti-fascist that you yourself become a fascist.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the abyss. Like if you gaze long enough into the dark aspects of your soul, you're gonna see shit you don't want to see. And if you blink, and meaning, if you falter in that, you run the risk of being consumed by them.
Yeah, it's like what I put here in the forbidden knowledge aspect of all his writing, where these people are looking into things that they shouldn't be looking at, and they either are driven insane or ultimately die. And
that's the overwhelming theme in Lovecraft is, don't ask questions that you are not prepared to have the answers to.
Yes, and we have here a line from the Call of Cthulhu, something that resonated with me, right, because it was brought up in my research. And he's talking about the grotesque statuette, right, who goes, "A form only a diseased fancy could conceive." And they say that he talked about, again, this is something that I covered too, where certain genealogy and certain people are able and more susceptible to the paranormal, right? You have the skinwalker, the wendigo, the chupacabra, if you will, right? This paranormal aspect of it, and form only a disease fancies. He's talking about people with schizophrenia that they say that their brains are wired differently and they're able to perceive other things outside of our realm of reality, right? That stood out to me. And I have here, in The Outsider, Lovecraft tells the story of a man who lives in solitude in a decrepit dark castle and can't remember when or if he has ever seen a living person. He decided to climb the tower into the unknown outer sky since it was better to glimpse the sky and perish than to live without ever seeing the light of day. He enters a window and is met with people whose faces were hideously distorted with fear. Fleeing with horrible screams, the man trembles at the thought of what might be lurking near him unseen. He then sees a reflection, and he says, I know always that I am an outsider, a stranger in this century and among those who are still men. This I have known ever since I stretched out my fingers to the abomination within the great gilded frame, stretched out my fingers and touched a cold, unyielding surface of polished glass, right? And that was like the part where they go, oh, he's the fucking monster, you know what I mean? Like, whoa.
Yeah. It was me! Oh no!
What the fuck?
That again, just a very staunch reflection of Lovecraft's self-loathing. I think that character, so many characters in Lovecraft's mythos are him, or at least aspects of his personality. I think that one was probably written during a depressive period of Lovecraft, where he's like, "I'll never." Maybe was that pre-Divorce to Sonia, or was that post-Divorce to Sonia that The Outsider was written?
Let me see here. I'm going to look it up real quick. I'm not 100% sure. It was in... Lovecraft. So it was written in... between March and August of 1921. So it was they got divorced in 1929. Was it that what it said?
Mm-hmm. I believe so, yes.
Maybe it had to do with his mom, right? Calling him ugly and all this stuff and making him believe that he was grotesque.
Yep.
And
that's a good point.
When he would look, he would believe it, because if you tell people a lie, enough times, it becomes the truth to them. So
yeah, I'm willing to bet that time frame is substantially shortened when it is your life giver.
Yeah, and I have this excerpt from the book Egregores and something. I forgot the name of it.
I got that on my shelf.
And Carl Jung's approach of individualism, where one integrates one's consciousness contents in order to advance towards the self, right? One must accept the loss of individuality by acknowledging that one is not the master of one's own house. But this is usually met with a paranoid resistance. Through the reading of Lovecraft, the reader goes through their own anti-human becoming, a sort of epiphany, if you will, but in the worst possible way. And I added that at the end. And a window into otherness unveils the monsters as none other than oneself. And the horror to change this is the only monster we are meant to conquer. And this brings me to the symbolism of the dragon and the sword being the monad and the dragon symbolizing the dark self. And by you slaying this dragon and penetrating the dragon, right? I don't know, whichever way you want to do it, Anton. You are overcoming that dark self and the subconscious. And the overarching theme in Lovecraft's work can be summed up in the following points. The search for knowledge is ultimately self-destructive for those who peek behind the curtain of reality. Number 2, we cannot escape the past, even the past of our ancestors. We are not in control of our destiny. Larger forces prevail. The modern age is decadent and self-destructive and under threat from primitive and barbaric forces, both within and without. And the final point being, ancient evil persists into the modern world in inconceivable ways, and once realized leads to insanity and death. Again, very dominant aspects of Lovecraft's work that we're talking about here. And how you mentioned earlier, Lovecraft's entities do not seek our destruction, but rather appear as utterly indifferent to humanity. And it is by coincidence that they have a relationship with us. By ignoring humans, they're actually contributing to a sense of alienation. The horror derives from the realization that common human laws, interests, and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large. The true horror is merely the mere knowledge that these entities exist and have come from the stars long before human civilization. These entities in Lovecraft's world were were not evil. They were far beyond any conception of morality, any human conception of morality. These entities exist in a dark reality where nothing is impossible and is beyond the grasp of humans. And I put hashtag no lives matter because your fucking life doesn't matter. And
not to the eldritch beings, no.
Yes, and they symbolize the essence of externality. As H.P. Lovecraft writes, to achieve the essence of real externality, whether of time or space or dimension, one must forget that such things as organic life, good and evil, love and hate, and all such local attributes of a negligible and temporary race called mankind have any existence at all. That's fucking dark, bro. Like nothing fucking matters. How you feel doesn't matter. What you're seeing doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Your nothing, your senses, nothing matters. That's a very nihilistic, right, point of view of that nothing fucking matters. And I want to get into Lovecraft's various types of entities, and we have the elder
why do you
thing.
think just one point, why do you think so many of us are drawn to Lovecraft in early adolescence?
Because we're going through that existential crisis, right, of trying to find ourselves and realizing what matters and trying to look within, right? And especially going through puberty, you know, that can be a very confusing time in the life of anybody, right? Especially as an adolescent, you're going through all these emotions, hormones, and all this shit, right? You don't know if you like girls, if you like boys, like what you like. So I think that people see themselves in this work. And me, you know, what draws me to Lovecraft was that he was a raging racist, and I really love that. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm not a racist.
Me spit drink all over my keyboard, you son of a bitch.
I love everybody. I hate everybody
really
equally.
Love his prolific use of the racial slurs. Isolate that audio.
Yeah, so what I love about it is, you know, I'm very big into science fiction, these different mythologies, monsters, dragons, Dungeons and Dragons, right? All
you
this
didn't
stuff.
get my 42-bit earlier? For shame.
No, I didn't. What is that?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. 42.
All right, kind of makes sense. I don't know.
Add a 0 to the end of that, and you got the ultimate answer.
420, baby.
420, bitch. Anyways, sorry.
So Lovecraft, I want to get into the entities that he talks about: the elder things, the great old ones, the deep ones, and the outer gods. Again, because he has this hierarchy of entities, if you will.
What's your favorite group out of all of them? Which one do you like more? Do you like the the elder beings and
the outer gods?
You like the outer gods? Okay.
Yeah, and that's the last one I'm going to be talking about.
Right.
So, the elder things were the first alien species to colonize Earth 1 billion years ago. They created Shoggoths. They created Shoggoths, protoplasmic. Shoggoth, protoplasmic shape-shifting beings able to reflect all forms and organs, who served as slaves to build vast cities, but were rebelled against their masters. The great city ruins remain frozen in Antarctica, and some of these entities can be found as fossils or in frozen hibernation. And then I put Transformers because, again, we have Megatron, again, frozen in time, and it was through the work of a human that they broke through in some frozen landscape, some frozen tundra, and they awoke him from his slumber. Again, very Lovecraftian, right? And
it's pretty much exactly what happens in Mountains of Madness.
Yes.
You know, the Arctic expedition goes down, and then they're chased by the incessant piping of Tekalili.
And my favorite part in this was, and the Mountains of Madness was it was a terrible, indestructible thing, vaster than any subway train, a shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous and with myriads of temporary eyes forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light all over the tunnel-filling front that bore down upon us. And then this is my favorite part in this whole fucking convoluted mess of words: crushing the frantic penguins and slithering over the glistening floor. So I can just imagine the fucking penguins just like, oh shit, no, and they just get run over by this fucking blob that's just...
Have you ever seen the concept art that Guillermo del Toro has been working on trying to get at the Mountains of Madness made into a movie? So he made penguins for it because the penguins are described as these hideous, sightless, deformed birds and shit. Also, we would be remiss if we didn't touch on the fact that Lovecraft identifies with the slave owner race of elder beings, essentially. Where he's like, at the end of the day, they were scientists just like us. because they only sought knowledge and advancement of their race. And it's like, okay,
that's a Nietzsche
down, Lovecraft.
concept, though, right? The slave and owner concept, right?
So that's a Nietzschean concept. That's a Crowleyan concept, and but the way that I know the way that it's always spun to make it a favorable thing for Nietzsche and Crowley is, like when he refers to slaves, he refers to those who are incapable of thinking for themselves. He's not saying if you think for yourself, you are, you're still going to be a slave. It's just kind of like for those that are the herd, that is where they'll be most satisfied. Like essentially almost like medieval peasants.
Yes. And so, again, the Mountains of Madness reminds me of Admiral Byrd, again, Hollow Earth, where they were supposedly said to have battled these aliens. And also, I meant to touch on...
the Nazi UFOs.
We know that with Goetia, right, in Solomonic magic, these entities are able to give people otherworldly powers. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier was that Lovecraft had some sort of remote viewing ability where he was able to describe certain settings to the T that he had never visited, right? So again, this aspect of this jinn presenting himself and taking over Lovecraft is, again, another... There's some validity to it because, again, it makes sense. It makes sense to me. But again, you have the fandom that comes out and goes, no, I don't fucking think so. So we have here the great old ones. That is not dead, which can...
Eternal lie and which with strange eons even... Oh.
Yeah. What the fuck? That is not dead, which can eternal lie, and with the strange eons, even death may die. And so we have here the great old ones were, the old ones are, the old ones shall be, not in the spaces we know, but between them. Again, this is that's what I love too, this interdimensional aspect of it all. They walk serene and primal, undimensioned, and to us unseen. And that's from the Dunwich Horror. And the great old ones are a group of unique immortal beings that were rulers and gods over earth, but now reside asleep, yet eternal, in various parts around this flat earth. And they can be compared to demigods, right? Cthulhu is the high priest and the great dreamer who lies in a deep slumber beneath the ocean. Again, we have Pacific Rim, this thing where there's this portal and these kaiju, right? Kaijus come through and they're these fucking crazy big, right? Even Godzilla is also Lovecraftian, right? Because he's at the bottom of the ocean.
In a way, I would say yes, very much so. He is, this.
But he protects us, right?
No, depends on which Godzilla it is.
Oh, depending on which canon.
Well, no, it's not even which canon. It's which Godzilla it is, because there are actually multiple. The first Godzilla, the one from Gojira, is dead.
Oh, shit.
Dies in the end of the first movie because they make the oxygen destroyer. And the whole thing, obviously, it's become a trope at this point. But Godzilla was developed at a time where it was illegal for them to critique anything America did. It was post-war Japan, so they can't really come out and be like, hey, there's this great dread that we're all feeling because you just nuked the fuck out of us. You literally destroyed hundreds of thousands of people in a fraction of a second. So we can't really critique that legally. So they made, Godzilla. And then you had the scientist who is basically almost an Oppenheimer who creates the oxygen destroyer, who's like, if I set this thing off, it's going to save us from Godzilla.
It's going to fuck some shit up.
But it's also going to be something, the box is open. You can't, Pandora ain't going back in. That's something that's been used in the same way that, once the atomic bomb was detonated for the first time, Oppenheimer was just like, oh fuck, what have I done? Yeah, I'm not going to re-quote the Bhagavad Gita, as I'm sure all of your listeners are well aware of what Oppenheimer allegedly said. I am become death, destroyer of worlds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's my favorite line. I love that interview.
It's so good.
Again, right?
Fun side fact, Dennis Nedry in Jurassic Park has a fucking picture of Oppenheimer on his computer.
Really?
Yeah, there's a little, for the longest time I thought it was Hugh Hefner, because he's doing a pipe. And I looked at it, I was like, that's fucking Oppenheimer, son of a bitch.
Again, this idea that in order to save yourself, you must, at what cost, right? In order to learn these secrets, it comes at what costs? And
it's not even to save yourself so much as it's to benefit mankind in putting an end to something, like the whole greater good concept. Like, do you unleash an ultimate evil for a greater good?
Yes. And Cthulhu, right, is this iconic monster. This cephalopod, half man, wing, if you can call it that, right? Wings of a dragon, and octopus are one of the most fucking alien things that are in our oceans, bro. If you see octopus, you're like, what in the fuck?
Extraordinarily intelligent. They can fit through almost fucking any crevice. It's
like they're like interdimensional in their own sense. Like they fucking fit through these little holes and they just go through it. Like that's crazy to me. And the way that they camouflage.
Oh yeah,
wild.
You're just not even going to see the motherfucker. And then some of them are venomous and stuff. Yeah, no, they're fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And again, Lovecraft writing what he knows, being so close to the ocean, and I'm sure having gone to an aquarium or two or seen, remember this is the early 1900s, so a lot of species are just being discovered. Like gorillas were just like gorillas and bananas were like brand fucking new to so many people in the West that are just like, what is this?
Monkeys eat bananas?
Yeah, they're like those are apes, but they look vaguely human, and I'm sure that fucked up with a lot of people's heads, and that's why so many people were just like, no, we're not, nope, Darwin, fuck you, I don't think so.
So, right, this being, this chimera, if you will, and the thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abysm. Right, I hope I said that. Abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled. I don't know why the fuck I put that shit there. So, Cthulhu echoes the word chthonic, one who inhabits the underworld. His residence is in the underwater city of deep within the abyss and the unknown, within the conscious, the unconscious. He is sleeping yet eternal, waking yet dreaming, dead yet alive. And then we have that is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. And
so harkening it back to the occult aspect of it, I have a deck of tarot cards that's the Necronomicon deck, and in that deck Cthulhu is the devil. Primarily because of the subterranean level of it, the fact that he is considered a destroyer, not an enlightener, which is weird because you would think that almost Nyarlathotep would be the devil.
But he has
I believe
also
Nyarlathotep's like the high priest or the emperor or something.
He tricks the outer gods, doesn't he? He does.
Yeah,
right, Cthulhu.
Cthulhu and the deep ones are basically at war with the outer gods.
Interesting.
So Dagon, I believe Dagon and Cthulhu are essentially same side. Hydra is also same side, but now we're getting into extended mythos type stuff. We're getting into stuff that Lovecraft himself didn't write, but his contemporaries like Bloch and Derelith and everybody like that wrote.
Interesting. Yeah, you have like, I don't want to say like the Jedis and the Sith, because they're all kind of like the Sith, but like there's these factions in between, right? These clans that are against each other within their own, right, denominations of evil, right? But again, they're not evil. They just don't give a fuck about us, but we can't comprehend that because it's outside our realm of knowing, right? So we have here, this line expresses Cthulhu's immense existence beyond human thought. It is in its eternal form. Even the concept of death is no more. Here we go. He had cast a spell on the great old ones, and while they no longer live, they have never really died. While asleep, they communicate with humans through the dreamlands of the collective unconscious. For Cthulhu is a source of constant anxiety for mankind at an unconscious level. Around the world, the Cthulhu cult praised the great old ones, chanting, "In his house in Relyach, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming." And when the stars are aligned, the underwater city will rise. And again, very Atlantean, right, in aspect. And with the help of the eternal Cthulhu cult, the great old ones will awaken and regain what was once theirs. The cult praised to their own demise, unbeknownst to them, as the entities are beyond good and evil. Any hint of malevolence is strictly the interpretation of the human who seeks an explanation for the unexplained. In the Call of Cthulhu, the protagonist, who was previously consumed with curiosity and traveled to unravel his mysterious findings, is terrified upon discovering the truth of the existence of the great old ones. And he says, "I shall never sleep calmly again when I think of the horrors that lurk ceaselessly behind life in time and in space." Now, go ahead.
Going into extended mythos type stuff, like the Call of Cthulhu D20 games, Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, Arkham Horror, things along those lines. That's the reason why your character uses morphine so fucking much, is because their sights and the things that they've seen will not allow their mind to rest. Like true madness, where your mind, you're just in there and you cannot shut it off. So
yes. And right, because they use like this substance, right, to be able to cope with with reality.
It's morphine. Yeah, no, they just straight up like just shoot up morphine in order to go to sleep, like the same way that like returning war vets would, you know, that were so shell shocked at the time or had battle fatigue or combat fatigue, as it was known, you know, became hooked on morphine just in order to get the visions and the nightmares to stop.
Holy shit! So we have the deep ones, and this is very quick. Lovecraft introduces them in The Shadow over Innsmouth. This ocean-dwelling amphibious, right, half-human, half-grotesque race that has strong ties with Cthulhu and are known for mating with humans. And I related this to the Elohim, the Watchers, the Nephilim, right? Again, because they would come down and fuck the humans.
It's very Faustian in its way, in that Obed Marsh basically makes a deal out on Devil's Reef with, you know, the deep ones, that this fishing town, this fishing village that is now going under, they begin bringing them, you know, just treasures and gems and everything that causes this great wealth.
Offerings, yeah.
Yes, which is where they then the humans create the esoteric order of Dagon, which then becomes kind of like this not a genealogical, but like a hereditary type thing, where it's like almost like a Masonic lodge, but an even more exclusive Masonic lodge that actually has ties to, you know, powerful deities. And the deep ones don't really die. They reach a certain age where they begin to
peace out.
Yeah, that as it's known, that Innsmouth look, because they all look like fish people. Actually, that's what that tattoo is. This is an Innsmouthian wearing a little fedora and smoking a cigarette.
That's awesome. And the protagonist, right, realizes that his lineage is traced back to all this shit, and then obviously he starts becoming, you know, spoilers.
Yep. Going back to that theme of you can't. The book's fucking like 100 years old at this point.
The
almost.
Devil's Reef. Devil's Reef. He starts going.
You can't escape your genealogy. You can't escape the sins of your father, which I think was Lovecraft's way of dealing with the whole, like, am I going to end up in the fucking loony bin like my parents, or, you know. Which he didn't. He avoided it. He didn't suffer a fate much better. He died penniless of intestinal cancer in the fucking, you know, in a hospital nonetheless. He still died in the hospital like his parents.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a loony bin, at least.
The deep ones, they worship Dagon, right? The most powerful of the deep ones. And
Dagon and Hydra, yeah. Ea Dagon, Ea Hydra.
I believe that Dagon is also a Phoenician entity, right? That was worshipped by some people. So it has an actual interpretation into the real world, right? So
Lovecraft was also one of Lovecraft's favorite books, despite being a staunch atheist, was the Bible, because he loved the way it was written, because he was a hardcore Anglophile and he loved the Old English. It was one of his favorite books, even though he didn't believe it as a religious text. He just viewed it as a work of historical literature.
So we have here the outer gods, and my favorite. And I have a quote by Stephen King from Cell. At bottom, you see, we are not Homo sapiens at all. Our core is madness. The prime directive is murder. What Darwin was too polite to say, my friends, is that we came to rule the earth not because we were the smartest or even the meanest, but because we have always been the craziest, most murderous motherfuckers in the jungle. And that's by Stephen King. And we have the most powerful of all entities, the outer gods, these cosmic entities located beyond the confines of Earth. And the most notable of those, because again, there's is there hundreds of? Well, the extended mythos.
The extended mythos we're getting into, yeah, but I mean, that's a series in and of itself. But the original, there's Azathoth, there's Nyarlathotep, which is the offshoot of Azathoth. There is, I believe, isn't Shub-Niggurath Yep, Shub-Niggurath is an outer god. Yog-Sothoth is an outer god. Yep. Haster is technically an outer god, even though he's not really Cthulhu's. Haster, I believe, is Robert Bloch from King in Yellow.
I have here the most notable ones being Yog-Sothoth, Shub-Niggurath, Nyarlathotep, and Azathoth. And most of them dwell in the outer voids outside of thought and existence beyond the ultimate gate, which leads fearsomely and perilously to the last void, which is outside all earths, all universe, and all matter. The ultimate gate can only be unlocked with the silver key, an ancient artifact that unlocks the gate of space and time and allows access to remote places of the universe. It also allows one access to all the possible lives one may live or have lived, and this gate is guarded by Yog-Sothoth, for whom time and space shares no boundaries. And then we have here, Yog-Sothoth knows the gate, Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth, and he holds the knowledge of everything and is the gatekeeper of it. And those who worship him seek the key to forbidden knowledge. However, it always leads to madness, and it opens a door to places we were never meant to travel. And
the only people who would really even be able to summon Yog-Sothoth would be his children, Wilbur Whately and Wilbur Whately's twin, which is how Wilbur Whately dies, breaking into Arkham to steal the Necronomicon so he can finish the ritual.
Oh, well, like some Babylon holding some or Babylon working ritual type of shit.
Essentially, but I mean, Wilbur Whately was distinctly non-human. And then that's all in Dunwich Horror. That's the whole premise of it, is that he, was the Goat Man. So, which would be weird, because I want to say, yeah, he's the father of Wilbur Whately, but for Wilbur Whately's appearance, I feel like it's more akin to Shub-Niggurath, which is the the goat with 1,000 young. Like that's the one thing that I always wondered about with Lovecraft's writing, where it's like I feel like he might have almost mixed it up there, but it's his work, not mine. So.
And Lovecraft described Shub-Niggurath as Yog-Sothoth's wife and a hellish, cloud-like entity. She can only be referred to as something unknowable, the not-to-be-named one. And while most of the outer gods are exiled to the stars, Nyarlathotep, however, is active and frequently walks the earth in the guise of a human being. He is a go-between for humans and the gods, linking us to the entities beyond comprehension. As the crawling chaos and cosmic shapeshifter, he has infinite shapes in innumerable forms. He is deliberately deceptive and manipulative, representing the archetype of the trickster. And I put Enki or Enlil, whichever one you want to say. He reminds us of the existence of that which we cannot truly know. We have Azathoth is the all-powerful creator of existence. He is known as the blind idiot god, who is absolutely mindless and unconscious, but is omnipotent and is the most powerful being in the entire mythos. And he has created all of reality in a dream. He doesn't even know he created himself. He is a dreaming monster in whose dream the universe resides. Countless lesser deities play manding tunes on innumerable drums and flutes to keep Azathoth from awakening. For if he should be awakened, all of existence would be no more, and all would once again be Azathoth. He is the embodiment of disorder and cannot be destroyed, as the concept of destruction is merely his dream, and he exists beyond all human concepts. So yeah, it's bro, I love that shit. I fucking love
it's
that.
great.
It's fucking awesome, dude. And to think, I'm so jealous that somebody is able to think up of these things and just again bring forth this entire mythos and universe. I think is very, very impressive, right? And
he created a pantheon. Lovecraft quite literally created a pantheon that some people regard as actual deities, because probably partially because of how much it pulls from inspiration from ancient deities and things that especially us in Western civilization don't really talk about. Plus, the whole lack of a pronounced ancient culture amongst Westerners, I think draws you to that. And another thing Lovecraft talks about a lot is he believed in an interconnectivity between all ideologies of witchcraft. He believed that there was just one well from which all magic sprung, at least in literary sense, not going into the whole actual metaphysical aspect of it. But that was very pronounced in his stuff as well. As all of these cults came from one place, and it's all just basically a game of telephone as they splintered and were scattered to the winds of what gets brought up where. That's why he said, people in South America were worshiping the same gods as people in Africa that were worshiping the same gods as the old Celts and things along those lines.
And that's
or at least varying degrees on those gods.
And that's history. That's real shit.
It makes sense if Pangea and the land bridge existed. Yeah, it makes sense that these ideas are going to span places that are now separate from one another, even though they were at one point in time connected.
So as we come to a conclusion here very quickly, I have a couple more things to talk about. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Twilight Zone earlier, and I have the Twilight Zone opening narration, season 1. There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. And he had, I should have added that. He had this thing, right? This non-Euclidean geometry and all this shit to express the unknown. He used mathematical concepts and bizarre landscapes that should not be able to exist. And he says in one of his stories, the geometry of the dream place he saw was abnormal, non-Euclidean, and loathsome, redolent of spheres and dimensions apart from us. And again, using abnormal geometries to capitalize on the fear of the unknown is found in many of his stories. And he's another one. He was swallowed up by an angle of masonry which shouldn't have been there. An angle which was acute but behaved as if it were obtuse. And
was that the one from Call of Cthulhu, or is that the one from Dreams in the Witch House, where he finds the door in between the dimensions that the witch and that the rat with the human face went through? Was the room that he lived in with that angle that just shouldn't be? It's the weirdest angle in a room ever, and he found that was where the portal was.
Yeah, I didn't write down from where it was, but I can imagine like, oh, it's a vagina, it's like fucking morphing. So he tries to present us with this idea of what this fourth dimension or other dimension would be, right? He describes abominations such as Cthulhu who fit well with what we would imagine something of this nature to be, right? This is otherworldly, this is cosmic, this is a horror, right? And that we see that in all his writings. And so there's this reference that people will hear at the intro of this. It is like an ant who lives in a two-dimensional world and sees a human being. It cannot comprehend it. Our hand to them would be something of another dimension appearing and disappearing from reality. Mm-hmm. And this is how these Lovecraftian entities would perceive, how we would perceive these Lovecraftian entities, right? They're in and out of this existence, in and out of this reality, but this dimension where, we may see them as like a string in the sky or some fucking shit. We don't know. So,
or even just a ripple in time where it's just, a little shimmer in the sky, and you're like,
those are glitches in the Matrix, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think, So we have Lovecraft's cosmic entities and objects exist in dimensions beyond the one we have come to recognize, if we recognize it at all, right? Because we don't even know what the fuck time and space is, really. This is what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
And so Lovecraft's worlds, they escape any visualization. We can only slightly comprehend the descriptions because of our limited knowledge. If we were to be tormented by these creatures, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know. They were just here. They can kill us at any point in time. We don't matter, and they control our emotions. And I have here forbidden knowledge. This is, again, another aspect in Lovecraftian writing. Many of Lovecraft's characters seek forbidden knowledge only to be driven mad when this knowledge is revealed to them. The pursuit for this knowledge also leads these characters to their deaths. And obviously we have the most forbidden book, right, which we'll be covering very soon. The book being the infamous Necronomicon, written by the mad Arab Abdul Ahazred. And again, he knows that these people, they still seek this knowledge, right? Even us, right? When we're looking into certain things, we know that,
of course, yeah,
this may fucking drive us to insanity, but we still want to look for it. And I want to conclude with, go ahead.
Do you think that was a commentary by Lovecraft on his views of modern society? Because obviously he was somebody who mentally lived in the past. He worshipped the past, for lack of a better term. He wished he lived there. He wished he could go back to the glory days of the Anglo-Saxon Empire and of the Nordic people in his own mind. And I think that it's possible, but I'm kind of curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
So what you're trying to say is like and I don't know if I should say this.
Let me paraphrase. The quest for knowledge leading to madness and destruction. Do you think that was his criticism on modern society? Like similar to like how Ted Kaczynski was just like, it's going to be bad. It's going to be real fucking bad. And you guys don't even know how bad it's going to be.
Yes. Nikola Tesla talked about this, right? He predicted certain things, the fall of humanity, right? Where this technology would come in. That's what the whole thing about AI is. And I think we can draw some parallels to this where maybe, right, Lovecraft was writing in order to, he was telling like his own story, right? We can see this. We can see the parallels in his stories. And dare I say that I can compare him to the great Saint Nicolas Cage, where he is living all these lives within these movies and trying to bring forth these different realities, right? Like the alchemist trying to pursue the components and the ingredients of the Philosopher's Stone. But at the end of the day, the Philosopher's Stone is us, right? And we are the alchemists in the cave looking for this knowledge, this gnosis that will help us eventually become enlightened to where we can recognize all things in the world. So yeah, I do think we can draw some correlations there as far as him trying to predict, because if you look at society nowadays, it's like we have all the information at this given point in time that we've had since the beginning of time, but yet we're that much dumber. We're more dumbed down. The more information we have available to us, we're focused on these other irrelevant things about society, right? Materialism and all these things that just draw away from our creative forces, if you will, right? Because we're not... People don't read anymore. People don't give a shit about any of that stuff. People don't want to study history. People don't even know who the fucking president of the United States is. And you can look around, people don't know. Some people say the Holocaust was fake. So yes, I can totally see that, where maybe having this abundance of information available to us even drives us to some sort of insanity at that point. Because I see that within myself as well. The more I look into things, the madder I feel, the more insane I feel, like, wow, this is too much to take in. So yeah, I think we can draw some correlations with.
Well, like, that, you're a parent. Use this example. How many choices do you give a 3-year-old?
None. Not
exactly.
Many.
So if we are still in an infancy stage, as far as like chronologically speaking, as humans, and we are just given this abundance of just sensory overload and input, yeah, it's gonna fuck a lot of us up. And to go back to your history thing, the sheer amount of people who have not even, a limited knowledge of history, but just a complete lack of interest in anything about history, or just being like, what do I need to know that for? It's in the past. It's in the past. I don't care.
It doesn't matter.
Do you not understand how relevant the past is to your daily life? And that pattern recognition is the thing that could make or break or save your life or destroy your life, for that matter. It's just, we should never be afraid for the quest for knowledge. But I think we should definitely be cautious about what exactly we seek. And I think a lot of it is almost a mirrored reflection of our intention. Because if you seek truth with, a heart meant for goodness, you're probably not going to discover anything that's really going to end horribly for people you care about.
Yeah.
Now, if you seek truth with a heart bent on, the quest for power, something else is going to happen.
It's the spear of destiny, right? Depending on which hands it is, it either causes harm or heals those exact wounds that it made.
Exactly.
And the spear symbolizing knowledge and how you use it, right? Depending on the wielder of that spear. And yeah, I agree with you 100%. People don't give a shit anymore. And I think that's one of the main problems with society, right? We've been conditioned to just fuck everybody else. It's only me, right? Hashtag whatever lives matter. It's like, no, they all matter. And I'm not saying anything. I'm not racist or anything like that. I'm just stating how I feel and how I see things fit. So you take that as you will, right? To whoever the fuck is listening. So we have here, and I want to summarize with this, conclude with this, the Dreamlands, right? And Lovecraft had a lifelong interest in dreams, and many of his stories were inspired by dreams. And we know that the unconscious symbolizes the archetype of the unknown. And because, again, we don't, right, how Carl Jung said, when you bring the subconscious to light, right, the dark self to light, it will show you the you'll call everything fate and just live life as you will, right, paraphrasing. And he had these dreamlands, and there were windows into forbidden knowledge and forces beyond humanity's understanding, a vast, unorthodox, and incomprehensible dimension that can be entered through dreams, which I related to the astral plane, right? This thing where people are able to go through and the secrets are revealed to them, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote the Dream Cycles, a series of short stories and novellas by Lovecraft, one of his most notable ones being The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, illustrating the scope and wonder of humankind's ability to dream. Everyone has their own dreamland, but share a common general land of vision. Lovecraft's stories are bizarre. They are so bizarre that the average reader is relieved of all their preconceptions about reality, and even their sense of self. In the stories, the characters who fear their loss individually and attempt to preserve it are the ones who fall into madness. The more you fight, the worse it gets for you, Anton. And
dude, the biggest thing with Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath too is that, you know, the character, and spoilers on the story, but the character of Randolph Carter basically starts out with being like, I need to find this forbidden city, this unknown Kadath. It's the greatest adventure ever. And then at the end of the story, he's like, I just want to go home. He dreams of Boston and the spires and you know, the memories of his childhood and the way that things look. And I think that, you know, is a profound example of Lovecraft just kind of expressing himself in a very pure way of just being like, look, I've been chasing this my whole life, and I just want to be happy in my grandfather's library again.
Yeah, exactly. It's again, home is where the heart is, right? At the end of the day, it's like, man, sometimes you got to just say, fuck this shit, I just want to go home, right? Sometimes we all feel that, so we can see a little bit of ourselves in all these stories. So that was somewhat, I think that went well. I think that was,
I think so too.
That was a crash course, right, into Lovecraftian mythos and Lovecraft's work and life a little bit. And I think that the next time that we see each other, we will be talking about the infamous Necronomicon, because I think that's another fascinating aspect to all of this. And hopefully the listeners enjoyed this, and hopefully we brought some nuggets of new ideas and quote unquote facts that maybe you didn't know about. But
absolutely,
thank you Anton, for joining me for this episode. I don't think it would have been appropriate to do it with anybody else except for that dude that I hit up and never hit me back up. But
well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Juan, and thanks very much for having me on for this one. This is, you know, as you are well aware, one of my favorite subjects.
Yes.
For any listeners that want to talk shit about anything that I said or got anything wrong, just yell at me at HP Shovecraft. Just send me a DM. I'll talk to you. I'll listen.
Yeah, if you want to plug your stuff again so that we can sign off.
So HP Shovecraft on Instagram, Invader Daggett _TTV on Twitch. I've played Dagon on there as well. I've played some of the Sunken City on there. So, you know, any horror gamers that feel like playing, even if you're just a Dead by Daylight player or something and, you know, want to play some Survivor rounds, hit me up.
And remember, everybody, none of your lives matter.
Of course, the Strange Brew podcast. I would be remiss if I didn't shout out Strange Brew.
That's right, Strange Brew podcast. Follow the socials at the 101 podcast on all social media platforms: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, Twatter. Make sure to follow the Patreon / the 101 podcast, and it's fucking fire on there. You will get access to episodes a week ahead of time and exclusive Patreon content. And I'm going to take it away with the music of Eric Zahn.
The fuck?
Later, everyone.
Louder.